Hi, I'm John Felt. It's been a very quiet week across the nation. Matter of fact, most areas to the west of the Mississippi River received well below normal rainfall. In fact, some areas received no rain at all. There have been some interesting spots over the last week, however. The upper Midwest, parts of North Dakota and northwest Minnesota received some very early season snowfall, and parts of the southeast U.S. around Lake Lanier near Atlanta received 5 to 8 inches of rain. Now, the next couple of weeks look pretty quiet. It looks like they could be similar to a couple weeks ago when a very large part of the nation received well below normal rainfall. Stay tuned to this week's edition of the Weekly Water Outlook. Let's start off today's national water briefing with an overview of rain that fell last week across the nation. What we see here is across the west and much of the central part of the nation and the upper Midwest, very little or no rain. Look over the western U.S., western third of the nation, no rain whatsoever. The area in green over the northern tier of the U.S., North Dakota and parts of northwest Minnesota, fell in the rain form of snow, which was unusual for this time of year. And then over the southeast U.S., a fairly widespread rain event over most of the region, with some pockets of very heavy rain, 5 inches or more from Texas over parts of Louisiana into Mississippi, and then isolated around the Atlanta area. So the percent of normal rainfall, a couple of things of interest from a percent of normal rainfall over the last week. First of all, it's a large area of only 10% or less of normal. Matter of fact, since they didn't receive any rain, that would be 0% of normal over the western U.S. Over the southeast U.S., I pointed out those pockets of unusually heavy rain. That would be 3 to 4 times normal rain or more. I circled northeast Georgia, and what was interesting there is 3 to 4 inches of basin scale and isolated 8 inches of rain fell over the upper Chattahoochee River just upstream from Lake Lanier. And Lake Lanier is a very important reservoir for not just the Atlanta area, but for the entire basin downstream from Alabama, Georgia, even northwest Florida. And it really needed rain, and they had a very significant inflow into the lake that brought the lake up 2 to 3 feet. So that was significant last week as well. So when we start out looking at the soil moisture anomalies, we see these broad scale trends across the nation. We have very below normal, significantly below normal soil moisture anomalies over the midsection associated with drought. And then we see above normal soil moisture anomalies from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, due to some recent rainfall as well as earlier tropical activity. So if additional tropical activity would move into that area, that could be a vulnerability. I do not expect it, though, so I'm not too concerned with it at this time. We also see a core below normal rain or soil moisture anomaly in central Georgia, and that's due to areas of persistent and continuing drought. So taking a look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, what we see here is a very large area of drought over the U.S. that's been there for quite some time. There's been some significant changes over the last couple weeks. One has been not only due to Isaac rainfall, but more recent enhanced rainfall. We've seen the drought intensity decreasing over parts of Arkansas and definitely over parts of Missouri and Illinois into Indiana. That has been, even though drought's still there, it has been some recent improvements to drought, several categories, actually one category over the last couple weeks. And then over the southeast U.S., that area has been sitting there for a long time, and we've seen both the coverage and the intensity improving in that region as well. That's been carved out both by the west and the southeast for a number of months now, and now with some welcome rain over central Georgia last week, the intensity has gone down generally about one category over that region as well. So even though drought's the big story, it's very extensive over the nation, over the last couple weeks at least, there's been some improvement. Quick snapshot at river conditions from the USGS across the nation. What we see here is we see basically below normal stream flow, normal to below normal stream flow on a daily basis over the central and western U.S. area, and that would be the red and green, and then normal to above normal stream flow over the central U.S. from the Louisiana coast all the way up into Ohio, and then also off to the northeast U.S. with above normal stream flow. Okay, now the big picture as we go through this week, a lot of squiggly lines here, so stick with me here. The blue is starting off the week and the yellow is ending the week. This is the upper jet stream, and I bring this up because this is what's driving the overall large-scale precipitation patterns. We've had this area of low pressure anchored in place for many weeks now. I think it's pretty unusual because usually after 2 or 3 weeks you switch or transition into a different type of pattern. This has really been sitting here for a number of weeks and really driving the precipitation patterns. As we get into the latter part of the week, there's some subtle changes. We see this cutoff low or nearly stationary low develop over the western U.S. Now, it's not going to make that much difference over the central and eastern U.S. on the precipitation type pattern. It's going to be a pretty quiet week. The low over the southwest U.S. could enhance precipitation over that region, but again, not do a whole lot for the far west. So even though the jet stream's changing this week a bit, the impact is not going to be all that significant. Now we remain in tropical season. Usually as we get in the next couple weeks, it really begins to ramp down very quickly. Systems now form more in the close-in regions of the Caribbean and the Gulf than further out in the Atlantic. The only thing out there right now has been a very weak unorganized system with a low probability of development. This could be gone over the next day or so, or could perhaps linger a bit. It is not doing a whole lot at the current time. If you read my information I sent out earlier this week, you might have noticed that I did say that the overall activity this year has been a bit above normal as far as the accumulated cyclone index goes. But basically, these steering patterns have been very unfavorable to bring anything over into the U.S. Other than a couple systems this year. And even if this system out here would do something, it looks like it's going to curve off eventually to the northeast. It might brush some remnants of moisture into Florida. But this upper trough here is just totally blocking, and we have this high here is having systems curve off towards the northeast. And between those two patterns, we're just really not any possibility of getting into the Atlantic region or the Gulf in the immediate future unless something would form in those regions, which is also not expected. So it looks like as we're winding down the tropical season, nothing right now on the horizon as far as impacts late in the season. Okay, so looking ahead for this week, these are the main precipitation trends that I see. And this week, which is not all that unusual for October, is a quiet week. The area in the dashed line, drought will persist due to the cooler temperatures, less evapotranspiration. It's probably not going to be very significant any changes in there. It's going to be pretty much status quo. If anything, it may be getting a little bit worse, but it'll just be very modest throughout the week. Very broad areas of no significant precipitation throughout the week, and that's going to include the north-central U.S. into the Pacific Northwest and large parts of the southeast U.S. No rainfall whatsoever, or very light rainfall. There are some areas I've indicated here in green that could get some light to moderate precipitation. They're either going to be along the jet stream as far as the Great Lakes region, along that low in the southwest U.S., or also along the stationary or nearly stationary boundary from parts of Oklahoma into Missouri. And even then, it doesn't look like heavy rain in there. So it's going to be a pretty quiet story as we go through the week. Thus, soil moisture, if anything, it's going to be decreasing over large parts of the region. A couple areas maybe a little bit, positive or increasing. I probably won't show this too much as we go forward from here, because I think we're getting into the time of year, it might not be quite as significant on the decrease side unless we see some increases. But for the most part, I think we're going to have decreased activity as far as soil moisture goes next week. So your takeaway points for this week's National Weekly Water Outlook. Broad areas of little or no precipitation over the nation over the next week. The drought looks like it's going to persist with not much change one way or the other. No tropical activity. There could be some remnants of tropical moisture into Florida, but over the Atlantic and the Gulf region, don't see any tropical activity, nor do I see any large-scale hydrologic impacts such as flooding. If there would be any, they'd be on a very local scale, but no main stem river flooding. Overall, a very quiet week. We'll be issuing information throughout the week, follow-up information, so stay tuned to that. If not, thank you for listening to this week's edition of the National Weekly Water Outlook.